Hello everyone, thought I'd do something a little different this weekend. As you know, I'm typically all about retro media, both in its physical form, lasers, VHS, whatever, and in the content. But I do watch some more modern TV, especially stuff that my wife suggests to me. She watches a lot more current stuff than I do, and sometimes she'll be watching something and suggest I get into it, watch it together. So today I wanted to talk about 16 shows that I enjoy that have aired within the last 10 years, that have started within the last 10 years, and some of them have run their course, some are still ongoing, fairly new, but talk about some modern shows that I like. Love to hear what your opinions are on these shows, and definitely let me know some very recent or even currently ongoing shows that you like that you think I might like based on these. Starting with Extraordinary is a British superhero comedy series. It's only had one season so far. I think the second season is airing soon. And it was on Hulu. This is another one that Amanda got me into. I wasn't quite sure going into it. It was one of those that's so focused on if the humor lands, you're going to like it. If the humor is not to your taste, you're not going to be interested. It's a world where the vast majority of people have some sort of superpower, and it's a world of superheroes. And the funny thing is, a lot of these superpowers are basically useless or just weird or oddities, just kind of a normal way of life. And we follow a group of misfits, including our main character who has yet to develop her power. And it's one that I think the humor landed for me, and it's all based on whether or not you think it's funny, and I think the characters were well developed over the course of the first season, so I wasn't so certain going in the first episode. I'm like, I don't know, I kind of liked it, but wasn't quite into it, but it really landed with me by the end of the first season as it grew and these characters developed, and I was invested. Number 15, WandaVision. By the time Disney Plus came into existence, I was already kind of burnt out on a lot of these superhero stuff. I enjoy a lot of it. It's just kind of a sit down and have fun kind of movie, and a lot of them have been just a shared pop culture type thing for so long, but they've never really been favorite movies of mine. I'll enjoy them, but it's never going to be absolute favorite movies in the superhero genre. So I just didn't care about a lot of these series, but I've watched bits and pieces of most of them, and a few caught my interest. The first one was WandaVision. Even though I was really not interested in more superhero stuff, I've always had an obsession with witches and old sitcoms, particularly like 50s, 60s sitcoms, and the movie into like 80s, 90s when I was growing up. So the combination of those in the premise of WandaVision was just too perfect of a recipe for me to sit this one out. So I watched it and I definitely enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, and really because I like a lot of those elements that are at play. One that was a big surprise for me because I knew nothing about this character or the comic book series, never been a big comic book person, and given the premise, I did not think I was going to like it anywhere near as much as WandaVision, but it's genuinely better, and from all the ones I've seen, probably the best so far of these Disney Plus superhero shows. Number 14, we have Moon Knight. I know it's my wife's favorite of these Marvel superhero shows, and I think it's fantastic. I think it is also probably the best at this time kind of standalone of these shows. I think all the other ones even shows like Hawkeye, which was pretty good, didn't quite make the list here because I liked it but I didn't love it, and some of the other ones you really, I feel like, had to have a lot of previous knowledge going into most of these, and even WandaVision, it's good that it's now finally coming to physical media, because the second Doctor Strange movie was basically just a sequel to WandaVision, so there's all this interconnectivity. Moon Knight, I really feel like out of all of them, you can go in without having seen any of this massive Marvel universe and enjoy it as its own standalone thing. And I thought the presentation and the acting were phenomenal, so overall, that was a great show. Number 13 is another weird one that from the first preview, I was really uncertain, but I knew I had to watch it just to see, and I ended up liking it a lot. Wednesday, the Netflix series. I've always been a massive fan since I was a little kid of the original 60s Addams Family TV series. Loved that. Watched all the other different incarnations. Grew up watching those two movies from the 90s as well and really enjoying those. and liking how over the decades there have been vastly different interpretations of the Addams Family, and that I think kind of keeps the idea fresh to some extent, although those latest few animated movies were just straight garbage. Wednesday, I was a little uncertain because, speaking of different interpretation, this is such a huge twist on the concept of the Addams Family. It's not really the Addams Family. I think outside of Jenna Ortega, a lot of the casting choices for the rarely present other members of the Addams Family were not so great. It looked good in a still image, really brought to life. If you looked at just a picture of the cast, I think it channeled a lot of the original comic style and like the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, like visually, but I don't know, it's one of those, it's not really, again, an Addams Family experience. They're just kind of there as a backdrop and a familiarity, but it's more about this version of Wednesday, which is a different interpretation of the Christina Ricci 90s version of Wednesday, which was very different from previous Wednesdays. So it's very much its own thing, just kind of using this familiar stuff as a backdrop to create something original. And I enjoyed it for what it was. As a Addams Family show, it's too different and does not really connect it in any way, but in its own right and what it is and what it does with that familiar premise, I think it works really well. I think a second season is going to be great, especially if it tones down some of the more teen romance stuff and goes more into the horror things. And the thing that definitely sold it for me was I thought Jenna Ortega, I'd never heard of before. I think she was more of a, much younger audience would be more familiar with her. I thought she was brilliant in this role, just really sold it for me to where I enjoyed it so much more than I thought going in. Number 12, this will be a curious one to see how this goes with further seasons of the show, but we have The Last of Us. I was never really into the game, never got into it. Amanda was the same way, she played a bit of it, never really got into it, but for both of us it worked as a TV show. In this form it worked really, really well, and even from what we've played and then looking at behind the scenes and whatever, I really feel like a lot of the things that were altered and either omitted or added to it made this interpretation fantastic and well beyond its original game form. The stories have to be told differently, whether they're a book or a movie or a show or a video game. You experience it differently and it has to flow differently, and I think they made a lot of the correct choices. So this was a fantastic show. This first season was just a brilliant kind of one-off thing, fantastic. I'm curious to see how it goes from there. I've not played anything I don't know hardly anything about the second game, only that just from what I've seen and read, it was very divisive, so we'll see how that goes in the future. But right now, this is a show that could actually move up in these rankings, in my favorites of these modern TV shows, because it was really well done and some outstanding performances. Just kind of edging it out, I think more so just because I really like a lot of sci-fi is like my favorite genre. Just barely edging it out is The Mandalorian at number 11. At this point, I have not tuned into season 3 yet. Yeah, again, a lot of this stuff takes me a while to get to. But the first 2 seasons, I loved what they did with it. Star Wars is something where I really enjoy those first 3 movies. I'm not like a big Star Wars fan. Like, I don't have a lot of Star Wars models or toys or anything. I enjoy Star Wars, but I'm not a really big fan outside of those first 3 movies. Those I love to death, but outside of that, I can take it or leave it. Aside from a few of the books, some of the novels in the 90s that were really good. So I liked how different this was from a lot of other Star Wars stuff, and I think it came together really well. And I just enjoyed it. I love the sort of space cowboy vibe. I thought it did justice to that universe from a perspective that was not a rebel or a Jedi. I really liked what they did with that show, and I thought it was fantastic. And I've heard season 3 is not quite as good. I want to get into it soon, but at this point, I really loved season 1 and 2, and even the little things they did with some legacy characters, like the return of Luke, I thought were short, sweet, and tasteful, and just done very well. So I was really impressed with how that turned out. Number 10 was actually not an Amanda suggestion. It is a very modern TV show that I just checked out on a whim because I like some of the actors that are involved, and I like a good murder mystery, especially if there's some comedy element to it. So I wanted to see Only Murders in the Building. Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez are such an unusually cast trio that is unexpectedly brilliant. The mystery is engaging in that first season, and the humor is consistently hilarious. It just completely melded together and worked for me, and it's such an odd, a concept and a casting choice that just seemed strange. Like this, I don't know how this is gonna work, and it played beautifully. I can't believe how well, especially getting currently we're in the middle of the third season, how amazing the chemistry is between all three of them. Selena Gomez, who it just seemed like kind of an odd choice, an odd man out. She works perfectly with them. She really does. Yeah, at one point, they talk about how she has like old lady energy, and she really portrays that and works perfectly. The three of them together it's one of my favorite modern casts in a TV show just because their chemistry is so perfect and funny and friendly, and I believe it, and it works, and I love a good mystery. I feel like the overall concept is slowly reaching the point where it's going to be beyond its peak and not really be able to continue. I think the first two seasons, especially how they tied in together without spoiling any of the mystery for people who have not seen it, really just work perfectly together. Just perfect. Watch one season 1 and 2, great standalone thing. It could have been done there, and this brilliant little mini flash of fun in the TV landscape. And that's kind of where I think the premise was like, all right, it's going to run out of steam. Thankfully, season 3 they found a way to make it still really good and engaging and fun. And you have involvement of some people like Meryl Streep who are really adding, again, some more fantastic acting quality. But it's something that I feel if this went on for season 4, 5, 6, whatever, the premise is going to run very thin very quickly. And I hope there's a 4th season, and then that's about it. This is one of those shows, like a lot of times a favorite show I want to go on forever. But this is one of those that I hope they, from a storytelling perspective, realize that it's a show that needs to go out while its premise is still fun and fresh and works. So hopefully either this is the end or we get a season 4 that maybe builds up and wraps up a few more things and it's over. But where it's standing right now, I really enjoy it. Number 9, this is another one that could go even higher with a season 2 whenever that happens, and however that happens. We have Star Trek Prodigy. Talk about any Star Trek stuff very briefly because I have a whole nother channel devoted entirely to Star Trek, so we talked about them a lot, and check it out over there. But Star Trek Prodigy was a big surprise as it's a perfect gateway into Star Trek for a new generation. It's a great kids show that will really bring across a lot of the concepts of Star Trek and what it is, and it's a great family show to watch. Overall, it's just a quality show. Number 8, I think, is the most frustrating on this list because a lot of these, they have in common that they have, as of yet, not had a physical media release whatsoever. A few of them, some of the Disney Plus stuff is finally coming out and has the potential to come out in the future, but this is one that I have a strong feeling is probably never going to happen, and it's really sad because it's a brilliant show, and it's my wife's favorite modern TV show. It's great. 3% on Netflix. And it's not just a interesting sci-fi thriller that starts off in a seemingly fun but simple premise and just builds and builds and builds. But I like that it's something from Brazil, and we don't get a whole lot of South American media here in the US, particularly, just speaking from our perspective. Internationally, most of the stuff that we have access to tends to be more movies than TV shows, and tends to be very European focused. And then a lot of Japanese cinema and a lot of Chinese cinema. A lot of Hong Kong is mostly like martial arts movies. But internationally, there are a few areas of the world where we see very little content at all. And again, places where you do, it's more movies that are readily available rather than shows. I think a lot of, for TV, it's more like, the closest thing would be a lot of BBC stuff might come over. That's about it. So to have something, I love being able to look at what's out there around the world and see something great come out of a region of the world we don't see a lot of content is fantastic, and get to experience these different perspectives and actors I otherwise never would have seen before. So it's really sad that this is a great thriller in a post-apocalyptic future that starts with the concept of a bunch of kids reaching age 20, getting a chance to fight their way through this grueling test, have a chance to be taken to the offshore to live in this paradise, and things get more complicated and lots of intrigue and build from there. And it's very exciting, and I absolutely thought it was a fantastic show. And again, my wife loves it to death, and it's frustrating that this is one of those things that I feel like is eventually going to disappear forever. A lot of digital only, a lot of streaming era content it's going to happen to. And I think a lot of the stuff that's going to be lost is going to be some of the best stuff, some of the stuff that's not quite as big name, mainstream, kind of Disney things. Number 7 is a show that I had to import because in an incredibly frustrating situation, the show Deutschland 83, 89, we only got 83, Deutschland, the first season, Deutschland 83, on DVD available in the US, and then not 86 or 89, the second and third seasons, so I had to import those. It is a Cold War era spy thriller during the time of East and West Germany. Just fantastic. I love the 80s is my favorite decade, and someone with deep attachment to Germany and German heritage, where my dad was from, a lot of family over there. It was a show that had all the hallmarks of something that I was probably going to enjoy, and I loved it. I think it's a fantastic show. It's not super long, so it's a show that I think you should check out if you like that concept sounds interesting to you. I think it was a lot of fun, very thrilling, great characters. I think got a lot of the historical aspects correct and done well and flowed into this fictional narrative, so I think it worked really well. I think Germany does a lot of that. That's one thing. German TV does a lot of really good political thrillers and murder mysteries and that stuff really, really well. And this is a fantastic example, and I think the first season is the best season, and that's very readily available if you're in North America, so check that out. So Deutschland 83, great show. Number 6, Ash vs. Evil Dead. Always been a big Bruce Campbell fan. I always liked Evil Dead, especially 1 and 2, and this translated to a series seamlessly and really was. This is the kind of Evil Dead that I like so much more than the newer movies that just, I don't know, they focus on a different element of the Evil Dead that's never been quite up in my, not in my vein quite as much, but this I think carries over the spirit of those first movies perfectly. It feels very much, especially like Evil Dead 2, I think it keeps the vibe and tone of that the most, and was fantastic, and it was great to see a lot of people involved in this from the Xena and Hercules days. So fantastic show, and man, that was a kick in the gut when we did not get a 4th season of that show, because they were building up to a really cool idea. Number 5, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, one I've been talking about a lot on the Star Trek channel as episodes come out, and hopefully it'll be a season 3 eventually here, but one of the modern Star Trek shows that really stuck with the episodic style, and for the most part stuck with being a very good Star Trek show overall. You have some things that are imperfect about it, but really good to see. And number 4, this is another one that was an Amanda thing she got me to watch, and I was so uncertain about it. Star Trek Lower Decks. I ended up loving this show. It still takes the humor sometimes. It's too frantic and too crude for my taste, but it's not always that way, and I can kind of look beneath that to what's really there, and what's really there is a love of Star Trek and feels like a really good continuation to a lot of the 90s in particular Star Trek stuff. So I end up really liking Lower Decks, and I can't wait for the 4th season coming out here in less than a week from when I'm recording this. And number 3, in kind of a similar vein, The Orville. The Orville was another show where, particularly in that first season, some of the humor was a little too silly and off the wall and took away tonally from some things, but despite those moments, I overall loved it, and it really was, and I still think, as much as I like Strange New Worlds, particularly when you get into season 3 of The Orville, I think The Orville is the closest thing to a true modern Star Trek that we have. In the type of storytelling it's doing, the way it's telling the stories, and it's its own in its own right. It's its own new original science fiction show. It's just fantastic. It just keeps a lot of the spirit alive of older Star Trek. And that 3rd season, along with the release of 3%, and I think is the most frustrating thing, those two things, although I think there's a greater chance of the 3rd season of The Orville coming to physical media, just because the first 2 have been released, and it is a show that's on Disney Plus and Hulu, and there's more of a chance of that happening. It's not guaranteed, but man, it's frustrating it's not out. And the season 4 renewal, who knows if that's going to happen. The Orville is just amazing, and I was shocked from the very beginning at how high on my list of favorite shows, not just recently, but of all time, that show ended up. Number 2 is an odd one because looking at series as a whole, I think this is the overall best modern TV series that I've ever seen. There's one that ends up my number 1 slot, but it's only because of a specific season. The other seasons of the show were terrible, but yeah, my number 2 and almost my number 1 is the still ongoing, season 4 has been coming out. I've not seen any of that yet. We have the German TV series Babylon Berlin, which is fantastic. It is shocking how brilliant everything is portrayed in here. It is one of, if not the highest budgeted German drama series ever, and they go hardcore with making this neo-noir feel as realistic to the time frame as possible. It's based off a series of German detective novels. This is a period drama, neo-noir, thriller, mystery, starting off in 1929. So it takes place in Germany during the Weimar Republic, that time period in between the end of World War I and then leading into the Great Depression and eventually World War II. A fascinating period culturally in Germany, and they really sell it with everything in the settings and the visuals and all the different political elements that they add into the story to add so much historical and real world depth to this intriguing, I don't want to give away too much, but murder mysteries involved with other mysteries, and a lot of vice crimes, sex crimes units, and a train possibly full of gold, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. It's brilliant, and the premise is great. Everything again looks historically so incredible. You believe you're there in that time period, in that world, and the characters are some of the best written I've seen in years. The acting is brilliant. The music is at times haunting, at times catchy. It just always feels so appropriate, and from a storytelling perspective, this might be my favorite show of the last decade. From the production standpoint, I think it is the best show of the last decade that I've seen. It's fantastic, and you have to check it out. I don't know what's on right now. I have them on Blu-ray, and I'm looking for eventually trying to figure out how to get season 4, because so far it looks like it's available in Europe on DVD, but I don't know. So we'll see what's going on with the history of the rest of that show, but those first 3 seasons are some of the best TV ever. Fantastic. I absolutely love it. And the only reason it's not my number 1, another show that again has great writing and acting and production values, but it wins out solely based on my eternal love for a franchise and legacy characters. We have Star Trek Picard, specifically Season 3. This is what I was talking about with Babylon Berlin, because Season 1 and 2 were disasters. And Season 3, while not a return to the episodic, positive spacefaring adventures of 90s, on the Enterprise D with these characters, it is a more time-appropriate thriller story that works as basically just one long movie that still gets across an appropriate admiration for these characters and a love of what came before without being solely a dive into the nostalgia pool without anything interesting and new. It's something that just works. That third season of Star Trek Picard overall is my favorite modern TV show, until we eventually, hopefully, get some interpretation of that Star Trek Legacy content that's been floating around. So I'd love to hear what you think of these shows, what some of your favorite modern TV shows are, some suggestions of some stuff to watch. And yeah, if you are into murder mysteries, political thrillers, anything like that, I definitely think you need to check out Babylon Berlin and the Deutschland 3-season arc. Especially that first season, I think, is still overall the best thing, in that only murders in the building. Check out if you're into something with a little more murder mystery with more comedic vibes. Lots of good dramas, superhero stuff. And if you love Star Trek, and if you like or dislike a lot of the more modern stuff, either way, I think you might like the Orville, especially sticking through it. I think a lot of people like it more as it moves along. I loved it right from the beginning, but again, the humor even is not quite to my style sometimes, but it works its way through it. It's not too overbearing. Turns out to be a brilliant sci-fi series, so lots to check out, and I'll see you guys around.